They were seen, but never heard. Praised for their beauty, erased from history. Behind the marble walls of Rome's grandest palaces lived boys and girls trained not for war, not for study, but for submission. They were Rome's most hidden secret. Concubines owned by emperors, senators, and generals alike. They wore silk, but they were slaves. They smiled, but they had no voice. And worst of all, they were children. This is the story the empire tried to bury. And once you hear what happened to them, you'll never see Roman history the same way again. Subscribe and keep watching. Because these are the concubines of Rome, the empire's most hidden scandal. The villa on the Palatine Hill glowed gold in the evening light, its columns casting long shadows over the stone courtyard. From the outside, it was the image of Roman perfection, grandeur, discipline, and power. But beneath that perfection, in a narrow, torchlit corridor below the marble floor, a boy named Calidus stood trembling, waiting for the door to open. He had been brought there in silence, his wrists gently but firmly tied with silk rope, a slave's rope, though softer to the eye. He was small for his 13 years, with olive-toned skin and long lashes that cast shadows over anxious eyes. His black curls had been oiled and pulled back. His tunic, white and thin, clung to his frame. A bracelet with the imperial seal had been placed on his arm, not as a mark of honor, but of ownership. Behind the door was his new world, the private quarters of Senator Gaius Silanus, a man whose power stretched into every layer of the empire. The senator's voice could have a man promoted or exiled. Now, it would determine what kind of boy Calidus would be allowed to become. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Gaius who entered. It was a woman, older, severe, wrapped in dark purple robes. She carried a scroll and a look of tired disdain. "Name?" she asked in a flat voice. "Calidus," he whispered. "You understand why you're here?" she asked. He hesitated. "To serve." She rolled her eyes. "To obey, boy. You're not a servant. You're a gift. A gift doesn't speak unless asked. You smile when he smiles. You cry when he asks you to cry. Do you understand that?" He nodded slowly. She turned away, snapping her fingers. Another boy, perhaps a few years older, emerged from the shadows. His face was blank, movements practiced. "This is Lyson. You'll stay with him until you are called. Do not speak unless you're spoken to, and never look directly at the senator unless he tells you to." The woman vanished behind the thick wooden door, and silence returned. Lyson led Calidus through a narrow hallway. Their sandals clicked against cold stone. The rooms were filled with whispers of incense and something else, something sickly sweet that stuck to the air. Calidus's heart pounded. He had grown up hearing tales of palace beauty, of the fortune in serving a man of power. But this was not beauty. This was a slow surrender, carved into walls too old to notice. That night, Calidus lay beside Lyson on a low mat, eyes wide open in the dark. "Did they take you from your family too?" he asked in a hushed voice. Lyson didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "They didn't take me. My father gave me." Calidus turned to look at him, shocked. "He gave you?" "For debt," Lyson replied. "He owed the governor coin. I was 14. He said it was either me or his hand." Calidus said nothing for a long while. Then, "Do you ever think about running?" Lyson exhaled. "There's nowhere to run. Not when your face is known in every chamber. Not when your name is tied to his." He turned his head. "But you're new. You still think there's a way out." Calidus felt tears rising, and he fought them down. In the silence, he could hear laughter from the upper floors. Somewhere above them, wine was being poured. Deals were being made. Lives were being traded. Down here, lives were simply waiting to be used. And in that moment, Calidus understood something chilling. He was not in Rome to survive. He was in Rome to disappear, beautifully, quietly, and without trace. 2 days had passed since Calidus entered the villa. 2 days of silence, grooming, whispered instructions, and endless waiting. He had not yet seen the senator, but his presence hovered like perfume, unseen yet overwhelming. Lyson taught him how to walk without sound, how to lower his eyes just the right amount, how to respond to questions that weren't really questions. But nothing had prepared him for the moment the summons came. At dusk, a servant entered the concubine's chamber holding a folded silk robe and a golden collar. "He's requested you," she said to Calidus. The robe was soft, the color of ripe figs, tied with a belt no wider than a vine. The collar bore the sigil of House Silanus. Lyson helped him put it on without a word. His hands were steady, but his face had grown pale. As they reached the upper corridor, Calidus felt his legs go numb. He was led into a vast hall of marble and bronze, flickering with torchlight and crowded with Roman elites lounging on low couches. Slaves poured wine into goblets shaped like lions. Musicians strummed quietly in the corner. But what silenced Calidus wasn't the splendor, it was the eyes. They were all looking at him. Men of power, senators, tribunes, generals, studied him like a merchant inspects a rare gem. Some nodded in approval. Some smiled faintly. One man, silver-haired and draped in emeralds, whispered to another, and they both laughed. And then he saw him. Senator Gaius Alanus sat at the head of the room, reclining lazily, one hand wrapped around a cup of wine, the other resting on the bare shoulder of another boy who sat beside him, older, but with that same drained softness Calidus had begun to recognize. "You must be Calidus," the senator said, his voice deep and amused. "Come closer." Calidus stepped forward, heart pounding. "Turn," Gaius instructed. He obeyed. "Look up." He obeyed again. The senator raised an eyebrow. "Lovely," he murmured, but scared. Laughter echoed across the banquet room. Calidus felt heat rise to his face. "He'll do," Gaius declared. And just like that, Calidus had been chosen. He stood beside the couch while conversations resumed around him. He was handed a silver bowl of figs, which he offered to Gaius wordlessly. When Gaius took one, their fingers brushed. It was nothing, but it felt like everything. A man nearby leaned in and asked Gaius, "New addition?" Gaius smirked. "Fresh from the provinces. Quiet, delicate, just the way Rome likes them." The man grinned. "Reminds me of my boy from Alexandria. Couldn't speak Latin. Didn't need to." More laughter. As the evening dragged on, Calidus's mind drifted. His feet ached. His neck throbbed from holding still. But worse than the discomfort was the realization growing inside him like poison. He was not a person here. He was a performance. At one point, a senator grabbed Calidus's wrist and studied his fingers. "Pianist's hands," he chuckled. "Or poisoners. What do you think, Gaius?" Gaius shrugged. "I think they'll be useful." Later, a hand brushed his cheek. Too firm to be kind. Another pinched his arm as if to test the firmness of meat. Words blurred together. Obedient, elegant, replaceable. He didn't move. He didn't cry. He simply stayed where he was, as trained. But in his mind, a scream was forming. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of realization. This was not just one room. This was Rome. This was the system. This was power dressed in gold and cruelty wrapped in silk. That night, back in the quiet of the servant quarters, Lyson asked softly, "Did he speak to you?" "Yes." "Did you speak back?" Calidus shook his head. "I wasn't supposed to." Lyson nodded slowly. "Good. That means he'll keep you longer." Calidus didn't reply. He lay down, staring at the ceiling. The laughter from the banquet still echoed in his ears. But beneath it, even louder, was one question. How many had stood there before him, and how many more would come after? In the days that followed, Calidus no longer returned to the small room he once shared with Lyson. He had been moved, upward, in theory. His new sleeping quarters were a private space behind a thick red curtain, just outside the senator's private chambers. The room was quiet, immaculately clean, and always dimly lit. But it was not his. It never would be. Each morning began with bathing, perfuming, and silence. A eunuch named Daphnis, whose face bore a long, pale scar down one cheek, prepared him like a statue for display. Daphnis never smiled, but his hands were gentle. "You must always be clean," he would say. "Your skin must be soft. You are not a servant. You are a reflection." Calidus asked once, "A reflection of what?" Daphnis didn't answer. He simply ran oil over the boy's shoulders and said, "You'll understand soon enough." One evening, A courier arrived with news that a foreign ambassador would be dining with Senator Gaius. The villa stirred like a hive. New silks were laid out. Wine was brought in from Hispania. And Calidus was instructed to be present. This time not as a decoration, but as part of the show. You'll stand by his left, Daphnis instructed. Do not speak. Do not react. You are there to be seen. When the hour came, the villa was bathed in gold candlelight. Gaius greeted his guests with all the flair of an actor on stage. The ambassador, a broad man with dark robes and a silver beard, arrived with 3 men behind him. As they entered, their eyes fell on Calidus. Barefoot, dressed in sheer white linen, eyes cast downward. The ambassador's smile twitched. You trained them young, he said. Gaius raised a goblet. Rome knows how to shape beauty. The ambassador chuckled. I see. He's yours. For now, Gaius replied. Calidus's stomach turned. For now. The words echoed like a threat wrapped in politeness. The meal began. Roasted peacock, honey dates, and bowls of fish stew filled the air with sweet and savory perfume. The men laughed, bargained, and gossiped. Occasionally, Gaius rested his fingers on Calidus's wrist without looking at him. A signal, a message, ownership. Then came the entertainment. Dancers from Thrace, jugglers from Crete. But at the end, Gaius clapped his hands once. A hush fell. A door opened, and Lyson stepped into the room. Calidus froze. Lyson was dressed in deep blue silk, silver powder on his cheeks, bracelets on both wrists. He walked slowly to the center of the room, then knelt. Soft music began, and Lyson danced, not wildly, not joyfully, but with precision, each movement choreographed to please, each turn designed to reveal part of his body. He did not look at the men. He looked above them. Through them, the ambassador watched with obvious delight. Impressive, he said. You trained them to be elegant and obedient. Gaius smiled. That one's nearly done. I may offer him to the emperor's cousin next week. He's shown interest. Lucky cousin, the ambassador muttered. Calidus stared at Lyson as he moved across the floor, remembering the boy who once whispered in the dark beside him. Now he was a different creature, hollow, polished, untouchable. And suddenly, he realized something that made his skin prickle. Lyson wasn't dancing. He was vanishing, piece by piece. The next morning, Calidus asked Daphnis, How long has Lyson been here? Daphnis paused. Long enough to know what's real and what's just for show. Has he ever tried to leave? He stopped trying years ago. Daphnis said, tightening the boy's sash. But not before they broke something inside him. Calidus looked away, his chest heavy. He didn't want to be elegant. He didn't want to be polished. He didn't want to vanish. But already he felt it starting. He was standing straighter, smiling more at the right times, reacting less when touched, becoming what they needed him to be. That night, when Gaius dismissed with a wave of the hand, Calidus returned to his curtained room and sat motionless on the bedding. The oil lamp flickered beside him, and he whispered aloud to no one, I'm still here. I'm still me. But even as he said it, he didn't know if it was true.
The villa had a secret, and it wasn't just the concubines. Behind the eastern wing, beyond a corridor lined with mosaics of dolphins and gods, was a heavy bronze door few ever touched. It led down, not to cellars or kitchens, but to an ancient underchamber hidden beneath the private baths. There, beneath the scent of jasmine and steam, Rome's elite bartered for flesh. Calidus had only heard whispers of it until that morning, when Gaius himself ordered him to accompany 2 guards down the stairwell. You're not being sold, the senator said, almost amused. Not yet. I just want you to see how the game is played. The words chilled him more than the cold stone beneath his feet. The auction room was lit with torches embedded into the walls. The air was thick, humid, and humming with quiet voices. Velvet curtains separated each chamber. And standing behind those curtains, waiting, were boys and girls no older than Calidus, dressed in fragments of silk, their faces powdered and their eyes hollow. At the center stood a raised marble platform. An older man, draped in black and wearing a silver chain of office, held a ledger and called out names like an executioner. Next, Numerius. Syrian. Well, speaks Latin. No marks. A blond boy was guided forward by 2 servants. He didn't resist. He didn't blink. He simply stood as the crowd observed him, their murmurs flaring like fire. Too thin, one man grunted. Graceful hands, another noted. Teeth, a third demanded. The boy was made to open his mouth. 10 denarii, a voice offered. 15, came another. 20. The auctioneer banged his staff. Sold. Calidus turned away, his hands clenched. A voice beside him whispered, hard to watch the first time. Was Lyson. Calidus didn't speak. He couldn't. Lyson leaned closer. I was nearly sold at one of these. But Gaius kept me. Said I was too beautiful to give up. Why are we here? Calidus murmured. To learn, Lyson answered flatly. So we don't forget what happens to those who aren't chosen. Another boy was brought forward, tan-skinned, taller, with bruises on his ribs. Run away, the auctioneer announced. The crowd murmured disapprovingly. 5 denarii, someone muttered. No sale, the auctioneer snapped. The boy was dragged away. Calidus's stomach turned. Where do they take the ones not sold? Lyson looked at him. To the pits. Or to the mines. Or worse. Suddenly Gaius's voice echoed from behind them. This is where Rome does its cleaning, he said. What the palace won't keep, the ground swallows. Calidus turned to face him, trembling. Gaius smiled. Do you understand your value now, Calidus? He couldn't answer. The senator placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Your beauty protects you. But only for as long as it's useful. Remember that. Calidus stared at the marble floor, his reflection blurred in the polished surface. He had thought he was the lowest, until he saw the forgotten ones. The bruised. The silenced. The discarded. That night, back in his curtained chamber, he found Lyson sitting alone, staring at nothing. Did you ever think of jumping off the Palatine walls? Calidus asked quietly. Lyson didn't flinch. Once. What stopped you? Lyson exhaled slowly. I wanted to see the sea again. Calidus nodded, his throat tight. Do you think we ever will? Lyson's voice was barely a whisper. Only if Rome forgets us. Or if someone remembers. They sat in silence. 2 boys among dozens. Possessions among thousands. But in the depths of their hearts, a fragile ember remained. A stubborn belief that they were more than the marble rooms, more than the collars on their necks. They were still human. And maybe, just maybe, that was the one thing Rome couldn't erase. News traveled fast through the villa that morning. An imperial carriage had arrived. Calidus stood by the fountain, hands folded, as Gaius's servants rushed to polish every column and sweep every path. Even the birds seemed to quiet as the wheels creaked over the mosaic tiles and stopped before the main portico. From the carriage stepped a tall man in a deep red cloak, his expression blank, his belt marked with the imperial eagle. Decimus, Lyson whispered. He speaks for the emperor's household. When he visits, someone always disappears. Calidus's breath caught. Inside the atrium, Gaius welcomed Decimus with open arms and exaggerated hospitality, but Calidus could tell he was nervous. He laughed too loudly, poured the wine too quickly. I've brought something special for you to consider, Gaius said after pleasantries. Newly trained. From the provinces. Unspoiled. Calidus knew he meant him. Bring him, Decimus said simply. Moments later, Calidus was standing in front of the most dangerous man he'd ever seen. Decimus circled him once, then twice, like a lion appraising a new cub. Name? He asked. Calidus, the boy replied. Age? 13. Speak Latin fluently? Yes. Decimus took his chin in one hand and turned his face gently but firmly. You're small. But that may work in your favor. Gaius chuckled, pretending the comment wasn't cold. He's clever too. The kind who learns fast. Quiet but not dull. Decimus let go and turned to Gaius. The emperor's cousin requires a new companion. Someone who won't cry. Calidus's stomach turned to stone. I will consider him, Decimus said. But first, let me see him walk. Calidus obeyed. He walked from one side of the atrium to the other, just as Lyson had taught him, graceful, steady, head slightly bowed. Good, Decimus said. He looks trained. Then he added, but he doesn't look broken. Yet. Gaius forced a laugh. That's the fun part, isn't it? Decimus gave no smile in return. We'll send word if he's chosen. And with that he turned and left. That evening Gaius was quiet. He drank more than usual. Lyson found Calidus pacing near the baths, his fists clenched. He's going to send me, Calidus said. Maybe. I won't go. You'll have no choice. I'll run. Lyson touched his shoulder. And then what? You'll end up in the pits. Or chained to a galley. You think the emperor's cousin is the worst thing that could happen. Calidus looked away. I don't want to disappear. You already have, Lyson whispered. We both have. We're shadows now. But sometimes, shadows learn how to move. That night, Calidus crept to the edge of the garden, where the moonlight spilled across the olive trees. He could still smell the foreign perfumes from Decimus's cloak, could still feel the weight of the man's fingers on his face. He remembered his father's voice from long ago in a simpler life. You were born free, my son. No one can ever change that, no matter what they try to call you. And for the first time since coming to Rome, Calidus cried. Not from fear, but from the crushing knowledge that freedom was now a word that lived only in memory. Still, even as the tears dried, something inside him didn't die. It flared. Quiet but defiant. If they wanted a shadow, he would be one. But a shadow that learned, that remembered, that watched. Because one day, even in Rome, someone would see the shadows and speak their names aloud.
It happened faster than Calidus expected. 3 days after Decimus's visit, before the sun had risen, he was awakened by a hand on his shoulder. It was Daphnis, silent as always, but this time his eyes looked tired. Dress simply, the eunuch whispered. They want you ready. Calidus sat up slowly. His limbs felt heavy, his breath shallow. Where are they taking me? He asked, already knowing. To the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, Nero's palace. Calidus stood in silence as Daphnis tied his sash and combed his hair. His fingers moved carefully, almost like a farewell. They'll change your name, Daphnis said after a long pause. All of you get new names once you enter the palace. You won't be Calidus anymore. He looked at the boy and added softly, Don't forget your real one. Downstairs, Lyson was waiting. He looked different, his usual distant calm replaced by something harder, sharper. He held out a bundle of cloth and placed it in Calidus's hands. A tiny seashell wrapped in linen. You told me once you wanted to see the sea again, he said. Keep this, even if it's the only piece of water you ever carry. Calidus nodded, his throat locked. Neither of them said goodbye. The carriage ride through Rome was long, silent, and suffocating. The streets, once vibrant with merchants and laughter, now seemed cruel. Every statue another witness to what was being erased. The palace was more monstrous than Calidus had imagined. Gold ceilings, obsidian floors, peacocks wandering freely among the columns. But it was quiet, too quiet. It didn't feel alive. The guards didn't speak. They led him through halls filled with frescoes of gods and lovers and wars, until they reached a room lined with drapes and soft cushions. A voice called out, Bring him forward. It wasn't Nero. It was one of his stewards, a man with cold eyes and powdered skin. Calidus stepped forward. You will answer to the name Felix, the steward said. You belong now to the imperial pleasure wing. You will be kept clean, silent, and smiling. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not eat unless told. You are not a boy. You are not a citizen. You are not anyone. The word struck harder than a whip, but Calidus didn't flinch. He bowed his head, not in submission, but in strategy, because deep inside, beneath the name they gave him, beneath the silks and oils and perfumes, Calidus was still Calidus, and he was still watching. Years passed. Calidus grew taller, his hair longer, his features sharper. They made him dress like a statue, polished and beautiful, frozen in perfection. He became what they wanted him to be, the favorite of whisperers, the darling of the corridors, the soft shadow at the side of powerful men. But each night, before sleeping, he unwrapped the seashell hidden in the hem of his robes and held it to his ear, and remembered. He remembered Lyson's hand on his shoulder, Daphnis's quiet care, the bruised boys on the auction block, the runaway who was never named again, the boy who danced to survive, the ones who vanished. He remembered all of them, and that remembering, that quiet defiance, was the only thing Rome never stole. You've heard the stories of emperors, of wars, of greatness. But behind Rome's marble walls lived thousands of voices history never wrote down. Calidus was one of them. So was Lyson. So were the nameless many. Their beauty was admired, but their suffering was hidden, their names erased. Now, you've heard their story. Now, They're no longer invisible. Subscribe to the channel and help give voice to the forgotten. Because history isn't just marble statues. It's the shadows too. And some shadows were human,